Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to introduce you to the Jure team that today will be having the pleasure to speak with you about smart contracts and blockchain and dispute resolution. And apart from our team, we will be also having Kristi Erasmus as our guest speaker. We are very happy that we could create this webinar with her and with the Cape Town community of legal hackers. She will be having the possibility to also talk about her and have the possibility to meet you guys at the she will be the last speak of the event. So Ben, please, because it's gonna be very interesting. So to start, please meet our speakers. Alessandro Palombo is the CEO, Raffaele Battaglini is the CLO, sorry, Luca Daniel, who is the CTO, and Luigi Cantisani is the legal engineer at Jure. For every speech that will be lasting 10 to 15 minutes, mostly 15 minutes, we will be having 5 minutes of question and answers. So please use the question tab that you will be finding at the right of the chat for asking any questions. Please, any questions, it would be very appreciated, because our speakers are here to solve your doubts in anything that is related to legal tech, and in particular to smart contract and dispute resolution. You can also use this feature, which is called upvote. You can upvote questions in order, if you are interested about any of these questions that are for you more important, you can upvote them, so it will be easier for us to decide which one to answer. And by the end of the webinar, I will be also asking you guys what did you like and what did you not. I will be sharing 1 minute form on a link, and that would be really, really appreciated for us to learn more how to make this webinar even better the next time. So let me again thank Kristi Erasmus for having helped us organizing this 3rd webinar by Jure on Legaltech. And Raffaele Battaglini will be the first speaker, speaking in 1 minute about what is a smart contract and what is a smart legal contract. Thank you, everyone, and let's start.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I am actually very happy about this webinar because I am the co-organizer of Legal Hackers Torino. So I am part of the Legal Hackers community, and it is really great that we are doing this webinar together. So give me just a second so that I can share my presentation. Here we go. So the presentation is about smart legal contracts, but first thing first. So what is a smart contract? And this is a very famous statement, according to which smart contracts are neither smart nor contracts, because someone says that smart contracts are not smart because smart contracts do not learn, do not improve themselves. And they are not contracts because are just a piece of code. Actually, I do not fully agree with this statement, actually, because there are the possibility that smart contracts may be something more than just code. And actually, smart contracts, in my personal opinion, are smart. But let's look at the first definition of smart contracts. Many believe that smart contracts were born with blockchain technology, but this is not the case. Smart contracts were first theorized in 1994 by Nick Szabo, who is a computer scientist with a background in law. And in his 1994 definition, smart contracts are tools to execute terms of a contract. So smart contracts, according to the 1994 definition, were actually software in order to execute terms of a contract. In 1995, Nick Szabo gave us another definition specifying that smart contracts are a set of promises and that are smarter than the paper-based counterparty. So the meaning of smart is not intelligent like artificial intelligence or like machine learning, something that learns, something that improves, but smarter means something that is more effective, that is more cost efficient, that is simpler, easier to use. So this is the meaning of smart in a smart contract. And in 1995, Nick clarified that no use of artificial intelligence is implied. So the inventor, let's say, of smart contract had clear in his mind the boundaries of the word smart. And in 1996, he gave a new definition saying that a smart contract is a set of promises specified in digital form, including protocols within which the parties perform on these promises. So we see that Nick Szabo actually shifted a bit from a pure software like definition of a smart contract to something that is more related to contracts, to promises at least. But we need to skip almost 20 years. In 2014, with the birth of Ethereum, the word smart contract started to be used again. And actually, the concept of decentralized smart contracts was born, because according to Ethereum, the idea of smart contract is implemented, is deployed on a blockchain, Ethereum. So they applied smart contract to blockchain technology. That way, the smart contract became decentralized. Now, when we use the word smart contract, we are referring to decentralized smart contract, meaning smart contract deployed on a blockchain technology. So what are the characteristics of a smart contract? We have already seen that a smart contract is a software, but it's not any kind of software. It's an event-driven software. This means that smart contract required an event that execute them. This is the reason, this is because smart contracts are expressed in computational logic. The obligations to be executed through a smart contract are expressed in computational logic. If, then else. If event, then consequence, else alternative consequence. This is the structure of a smart contract. Smart contracts are drafted, are developed with a dedicated programming language. For example, Ethereum adopts the Solidity programming language, and the smart contract allow the self-execution of the performances established, developed, set forth within the computer code. In this slide, if you look at the left side of this slide, you will see an actual smart contract. Smart contracts are expressed in that way. This contract is the Tooth Fairy contract. Actually, someone decided to develop a smart contract establishing the transfer of money to a child losing his tooth. This is actually interesting because we can see a couple of things here. First of all, this smart contract, in order to be executed, require an information, an event that happens outside a blockchain, that happens off-chain, which is the status of the tooth of the child. This means that this smart contract requires some kind of source of this information that is off-chain. Someone needs to tell the smart contract what is the status of the tooth. According to this smart contract, this source of information, which is usually called oracle, is the mom. The mom is the person that can inform the smart contract about the status of the tooth. So we need to rely on the mom providing the correct information to the smart contract. If the status of the tooth is fallen, so if the mom, the oracle, tells the smart contract that the tooth is fallen, then the smart contract executes and send crypto value, cryptocurrency, Ether, to the wallet of the child. This smart contract has one issue, actually. What happens if no Ether are available within this smart contract? This event is not described within this smart contract. But we know that a smart contract stored on a blockchain cannot be modified later on from the parties. So this is where, in my personal view, the job of a lawyer is important. The lawyer must always think of any kind of scenario that may happen in a contractual relationship. So if a lawyer was included in the development of this smart contract, maybe the lawyer would have informed the parties that that specific scenario was not regulated. And in that case, the developers would have the possibility to include this specific situation where no Ether were available. All these description of the contract tooth fairy allow us to go deeper, first of all, on the oracle matter. We have already said the oracles are source of information, taking an information that is off-chain, outside a blockchain, and send this information on-chain to the smart contract that is developed on-chain. Oracle may be a person, as we have seen in our example, the mom, maybe third parties like a bank, like an insurance company, like indexes or stock exchange, or the wisdom of the crowd, many users providing information, providing data. Or Oracle may be machines like sensors. You can think of GPS or a temperature sensor, anything that can send information off-chain to on-chain. And this is very important. And oracles are a very delicate matter to be discussed, to be regulated if two parties want to adopt a smart contract within their contractual relationship, because the parties must rely on the oracles. If the oracles send an incorrect information to the smart contract, the smart contract may enter into execution and may behave in an unwanted way. So it is important that the oracles are identified correctly, and also the risk concerning the oracle should be regulated within the contract among the parties. Actually, someone suggests to identify 3 different oracles, and if 2 out of 3 provide the same information, then the smart contract executes. We are shifting from the software point of view to the contract point of view, and we can now discuss the relationship between traditional contract and smart contract. According to my point of view, there are 2 possible ways interact. First of all, the smart contract might be a tool to automate those provisions of a traditional contract that can be automated. And in order to understand this, first of all, we need to examine a traditional contract and identify those provisions, those clauses that can be expressed in computational logic. If then else, if we can express a clause in this way, we maybe can automate that clause through a smart contract. Then we need to understand if it is actually possible and if it makes sense to adopt a smart contract to automate that clause. So this means that the smart contract is considered, according to certain doctrine, as a smart legal contract because it is connected to a traditional binding contract and is a tool to automate the performance of that specific clause. I suggest in this case to regulate in the traditional contract what kind of blockchain we are going to use to adopt the smart contract, who is the developer that is going to develop and deploy the smart contract, and what are the liabilities, who bears the risk of the failure of the smart contract or the actual failure of the developer. The other possibility is to use a smart contract as a substitute to the traditional contract. In this case, we will not have the traditional contract, we only have the smart contract, meaning we will only have a text written on a blockchain. Of course, this kind of use of a smart contract as a substitute to a traditional contract is possible only if the provisions can be expressed in a computational logic. And my suggestion would be to add, along with the computer code expressing the smart contract, also traditional language, natural language for all other provisions that cannot be expressed in a computational logic, like good faith behavior, like jurisdiction, applicable law, because I want you to have this information clear in your mind. When you write the text of the computer code to be deployed on a blockchain, you can also add natural language. And then we have a pure smart legal contract, meaning we have a text document that includes both natural language and computer code, where that would be legally binding, that would include skills that are usually of lawyers and skills that are usually of developers, and contract law would apply, at least from a theoretical point of view. Of course, there is a problem concerning the actual enforcement of contract law to a phenomenon that basically is a software. But if this text on blockchain meets the requirements of a contract, like offer acceptance, meeting of the minds, the kind of performance, the consideration, then from a pure theoretical point of view, contract law would apply. I totally know that there might be difficulties in actual enforcement of the contract law. So this ends my presentation. I will take any kind of questions that you would like to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raffaele. You were absolutely clear, I guess, and that your speech moved a lot of interest, because you can see by the questions tab that we already have 5 questions. One is quite upvoted, the one by Max Andreas Reiner. I don't know. I think that you would be, I mean, the best person to decide which ones are the ones that you can answer in 5 minutes. So please take a look at them. But I think that the one by Max Andres should be answered, and also this first one could be very interesting because maybe it's helping everyone to understand again what we're talking about. So is a smart contract a legal document? Is it regulated?
Okay, I am seeing a question from Max Andreas Reiner and Lerato Shoni. I hope my pronunciation is correct. So first of all, yes, there are more than one blockchain out there made for smart contracts. The first one was Ethereum, then others came out like VeChain, EOS, Tezos. So all those blockchains can be utilized to develop and deploy smart contracts. Second question, the processes and interactions of smart contracts are largely driven by user inputs. Actually, they need an input, they need an event, but this event not necessarily is given by a user. The event may be something happening in as a natural phenomenon, like let's say the temperature, or a factual phenomenon like the delivery of a good to a specific port. So not always it's a user input. It's an input that may be from any kind of source. Then the other question is, a smart contract a legal document? Is a smart contract regulated? So basically the smart contract is a software. Smart contract, in my personal opinion, may be legal document if they meet the requirements provided under the applicable law concerning contract law. So like in the example that we made, if there is the meeting of the minds, if the performances are clear, if there is a consideration, then in my personal view is a legally binding document. Okay, Federico.
Thank you very much, Raffaele. So I would like to tell our audience that these questions will not be wasted, and we will be collecting them also, and will be answering them in the future and publishing them also on Medium. So you can also see some written answers to it. And let's move on to the second talk. And this time is by legal engineer Luigi Cantisani, who is an expert in the dispute resolution field, in particularly the one applied to blockchain. So we'll be having the pleasure for your talk, and let's move on.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. It's a pleasure to stage the floor once again with my mates at Jure. And yes, we are here to talk about online dispute resolution. I hope that you can see my presentation. Fede, could you confirm me that the presentation is?
Yes, we can. Yes, you can go on. We can see.
Okay, great. Yes, so this is the point that we are gonna discuss. Why do we need online dispute resolution if we need them, and how this connects to blockchain-based applications? So the starting point is online resolving dispute online is perceived as a way for evolving justice from a certain point of view, but also a way to make it easier to access justice. Okay, so this is the key point. Keep that in mind. In reality, online dispute resolution is just a sort of evolution of alternative dispute resolution, okay? So to really get into ODR, okay, is the abbreviation commonly used for online dispute resolution, it's important to have a good understanding of ADR, okay? Well, ADR is in a certain way always been there. You see, nowadays we are familiar with mechanisms such as mediation, conciliation, arbitration. It's important to say that arbitration is not usually considered proper ADR, okay, in the European continent, while it's different in the US, where this abbreviation ADR also includes arbitration. But you know, this is more a matter of terminology, let's say. But the idea is that means for resolving disputes other than litigation before domestic courts exist, are used, and have always been with us since ancient times, let's say. And indeed, story tell us that alternative ways for resolving dispute have, have been, you see, strongly connected with the evolution of trade, okay? And this was especially, let's say, extremely concrete during the medieval age, where the modern notion of state was far away from existing, and where merchant law basically was the basis for governing trade. In such a world, alternative ways for resolving disputes were the primary solution, okay? And this has not really changed. I mean, the modern notion of state came to light, the modern notion of sovereignty and domestic justice came to light, but despite that, there are certain needs that cannot be efficiently covered by domestic courts, and that's why alternative dispute resolution methods went on. They still exist and they're still used, especially with the evolution, okay, of international trade, okay? Because think of this: domestic courts are meant for regulating, basically made for judging disputes, you know, between regarding domestic cases, okay? Because if you are, let's say, a Swiss judge, you're probably skilled in Swiss law, and so you're more familiar with cases that are strictly connected with just one jurisdiction. But with cross-borders transaction, domestic courts are not sufficient, okay? So ADR are not just useful for, let's say, domestic cases, but are extremely important and valuable for cross-border transactions, okay? Now, apply this to the evolution of transactions, okay, that happened with the advent of internet, okay? Millions and millions of transactions happening quickly, concluded quickly, payment that just happened, you know, so quickly, issues that can arise from these transactions. So obligations that have not been performed. And you can easily understand how the need for methods for resolving quickly these disputes, this issue came to light. And so for cases, for transactions that are born online, the most suitable solution seemed to be having online dispute resolution. It's undisputed that e-commerce and other ways for concluding online transaction has been the biggest driver for online dispute resolution. And so I would like to use this as let's say, a milestone, okay, for explaining the transition, the transition towards online dispute resolution. Since that very moment, okay, the word kind of changed. Online dispute resolution came to light, but the meaning of this notion was not the same for everyone, okay? Because the idea of having online ways for resolving disputes has been applied in different ways, depending on the scenario, okay? On the concrete scenario. And so nowadays, this definition, ODR, can be could provoke some kind of misunderstandings, okay? Because you can see this definition in many different cases, but what is really ODR nowadays? And so let's move on with this tentative classification, let's say. There are means for resolving disputes that are based on online features, okay? So these are not proper ODR mechanism. They're just ways for including an online component in a flow that is not meant to be online per se. It's just a way for streamlining certain phases of a more traditional procedure. So, for instance, online case files, virtual hearings, online application. You see, it's just a piece of the workflow made online. And so probably this is the less ambitious way to implement online dispute resolution, but it's still valuable in some ways. Sorry, because probably I have a problem with my audio. Okay, I hope that you can hear me. And so probably this is the less ambitious way for implementing online features. Then we have something different, the so-called electronic ADR. Okay, this is something more ambitious, because you're not just implementing online features for one or two phases of the workflow. No, you're kind of replicating the workflow online. And so we have electronic arbitration, electronic mediation, and so on and so forth. You know, the idea is to take a traditional procedure and bring it online entirely in it. So not just one single piece, you know. Obviously, also domestic courts can take advantage of these experiments. You know, certain features are have been tested, let's say, in the ADR world, but this does not mean that court cannot take inspiration from that. And as a matter of fact, in many jurisdictions now we have the possibility of submitting applications online, having online requests, you know, stuff like that. We don't have full online cards, let's say, but we have cards that actually have moved part of their procedures online, and this is a good thing in my way. And then we have probably the most ambitious way to apply internet to dispute resolution, and it's the so-called automated ODR group. Okay, what is the difference here? While with electronic ADR, you're just kind of replicating a procedure, okay? With automated ODR, you're trying to automate something within this procedure, okay? And this is really, really interesting. And this is where blockchain and smart contract come into play, because as Raffaele said before, blockchain and smart contracts running on blockchain are a good way for automating. Okay, so this is where you use blockchain smart contracts to automate part of your ODR mechanism. But before getting there, let's see the evolution of ODR. The first truly successful experiment has been CyberSettle, which basically invented the so-called double-blind bidding mechanism. This platform was meant for insurance claims, and the double-blind bidding was basically about keeping hidden the demands and the offers and the demands between the parties to the dispute. And then an algorithm basically match demands and offer to find the solution, let's say the middle point, something that could be convenient and appreciated by both parties. So as you can see, in this case, automation is applied to the outcome, okay, of the dispute, to help the outcome of the dispute, to basically help finding a solution. So it's something related with the decision-making process, okay? This is not really a decision-making process, because as you can see, it's more like a negotiation. But the idea is that the mechanism works on the to help the outcome, okay, of the dispute. Another interesting case was SmartSettle, which used a mechanism inspired by double-blind bidding that is named visual blind bidding. In this case, what is hidden are not demands and offers, but what the parties are willing to accept. But the idea is basically the same, like having algorithms that match the preferences of the parties. And this is really interesting. iCourthouse, this was the first website where anybody could file a case, and the case was decided by a jury. Okay, so basically people that visited and participated somehow the website. This is interesting because there was not a proper, let's say, component automation element, but there was the idea of community contributing, okay, to the outcome of the dispute. And was something still online, let's say. There have been other experiments for bringing arbitration and courts online. I don't want to spend too much time on this because the presentation will be available later. But what I want to stress is that there are a lot of experiments going in this direction. Okay, some experiments failed, some are kind of working, and this brings us to ODR that are somehow blockchain based. There are companies, including Jure, that are developing blockchain-based ODR. And the idea here is to match what we said before. Do you remember? Using automation, real automation on the one end, and on the other end, as the project that I mentioned before, bringing the community. Okay? How? Basically, this is the point. All these ODR mechanism are based on the idea that is not an algorithm in charge for deciding the disputes. There are decision makers, human decision makers, or call them jurors, or as you prefer. Okay, but the idea is that human activity is involved, is applied to the decision-making process. What is really automated is the execution of the decision. And so, for instance, you can have an escrow smart contract that locks a sum of money, and then depending on the outcome of the decision, which, as I said, is made by humans, the sum can be moved and assigned to the winning party. So this is how all these things can be, let's say, united, okay? Now, why all of this? Because, as I said, the idea is that internet can make justice way more accessible. And as an OECD report from 2016 said, actually, there are more humans that use internet than humans that are really protected under the law. And being protected under the law means having access to justice, because if you cannot access justice, basically laws just remain there. There's no way for having, decisions and enforcement. So that's the idea. And blockchain and smart contracts are a good way for, let's say, make justice way more accessible. Not only because it's based on internet, but because it can bring more security, traceability. You can create tokenomics model that make the community, so the decision makers, but also other kind of players engaged. And obviously, this brings us to the idea of the DApp model, which I will not explain because it will be done later. But that's the point. That's why blockchain and smart contracts are useful for evolving ODR.
Great, Luigi. Thank you very much. I think that we could use some time to answer the questions because there are a lot. You will be seeing them right now. And if I can suggest, we could try to Georgia Lazaris one, who got 5 upvotes, and also Tanvir Munim, who got 5 upvotes. But you can, please go through them and let us know what you think is the best to be answered right now.
Yes, is my presentation still on, or did I turn it off? Because I'm kind of having an issue right now. Could you disable, please?
We don't see that.
Great. Okay. So let me check the questions. Okay, so I can answer to the question of Georgia, which is really upvoted. Okay. Thank you for all this webinar. How do you think ODR will evolve in the next years? And what will the role of blockchain-based ODR be? This is really interesting. We basically cannot predict the future, and as the other speakers will say, getting into the blockchain space is not so easy for everyone. Actually, there are frictions to the mass adoption, but this is what I believe. The COVID crisis is basically proving us that moving certain procedures online is really, really useful. The idea is that you need to make blockchain and smart contracts like a valuable support for the idea, for the notion, for the concept of online dispute resolution, which means that this kind of technology is there. He has to help. He has to make the procedure better. Otherwise, obviously, it's pointless. But let's say this doesn't have to be the selling point. It's like using the internet, okay? Actually, we are all participating to this webinar, but we are not thinking of the internet protocol that is beyond it, okay? We're just thinking of the platform that we're using for this webinar, and that's it. I believe that applications for running blockchain-based ODR should work in the same way. When we'll get there, then mass adoption could become something true. Until we get there, obviously, there is a problem. But I believe that this kind of revolution cannot happen in just a few months or a few years, okay? We love the example, also Alessandro always used that example of Amazon. Think of Amazon in the 90s and think of Amazon nowadays. And one last thing, maybe, I believe that after these experiments with ODR, you see, also the arbitration chambers are kind of testing ways for moving online at least a few parts of their procedure. After tasting all of this, I believe that people will not be so inclined to get back to old-fashioned ways for resolving dispute. That's my idea. Shall we move to another question?
Okay, no, Luigi, I think that we should move to the next speech, but
Okay.
if we can get to have some time later on, we could get back and answer again. So
Okay.
please introduce you now to our CEO, Alessandro Palombo, who will be delivering a speech on DApps. Thank you.
So thank you, Fede, and I'm really glad to be here today with you, and thanks to Raffaele and Luigi for the speeches, and of course to all of you for the interesting questions you proposed. So in my speech, I will try to be really short, probably in 6-7 minutes, to give you a couple of highlights about what a DApp is, and my goal would be essentially to try to provoke in you a kind of new interest in these topics. Then we will be glad with Luca to come back to some questions of yours and to maybe expand a bit some of them. First of all, what is a DApp? Probably for some of you, maybe it's something really not familiar, but DApps is an acronym standing for Decentralized Application. And generally speaking, the concept of the DApps today is still not completely clear. I will provide you with just a basic definition from a technical perspective, but the next minutes I will try to make a couple of thoughts for challenging this description and understanding if it is really the core, the essential element of what a DApp is and why we should be interested and following this interesting phenomenon for the coming years. A DApp, in a few words, is an application that has as a backend, let's say, blockchain, for simplifying it. So as you know, when you use, for example, Uber or Twitter, behind the interface, there is a centralized server. And in this case, in a DApp, there is directly the blockchain. This assumption, which is interesting from a technical perspective, it's not really maybe useful if we don't ask ourselves why. It might be useful to have as a backend of an application a blockchain or a system of smart contracts. The answer is probably really easy. The answer is that if you have a DApp, which is essentially an application for connecting with some rules, several individuals in a system, you are enabling, let's say, peer-to-peer relationships and economical relationships in a different way. Which kind of which kind of impacts we can expect from DApps? In theory, and then I will give you an example, we can expect that there will be a reduction of the friction between actors, for example, buyers and sellers. Let's imagine a kind of decentralized e-commerce where I can buy from anyone according to certain rules and certain, for example, insurances or some systems that provide me a guarantee without an intermediate entity. Amazon without Amazon, eBay without eBay. Of course, this is a theoretical idea. Maybe we will require a few years or decades for getting exactly there, but I want to give you just an idea of the whole concept for now. Middlemen then will be reduced, and of course, eventually it will be economically more sustainable, the relationship by itself between two or more individuals, because there won't be, or the fees for the service will be reduced. But what personally I find most interesting is that let's imagine Facebook without Facebook. So let's imagine a system for having a social network with several rules or economic incentives in publishing some news, some information, some sharing some content, where there is no company making business with your content. So the direction that decentralized application can enable is a new kind of internet where you are the owner of the value you create. These kinds of assumptions are really exciting from a theoretical perspective. The practice for today might be less interesting. Let's analyze together an example. I invite you, when you want, to give a look to a project, ODR. Personally, this was one of the projects that I started at the beginning to follow with more interest, and still, to me, it's really interesting. ODR can be defined as a prediction market. To make it really simple, because we could spend hours discussing about ODR, what you see now is the interface that a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I took from their website. Behind this interface, there is only blockchain and smart contracts. Regulating what? ODR tries to ODR built a system of smart contracts for regulating, how can I say, the prediction of an event, like if the event was a kind of bet. So you can eventually bet on the chances that you think that the next president of the United States will be a certain person, and the system, the software, in this specific case, run on smart contract, will manage the odds of the bet. So there is no intermediate entity regulating the economical activities, the bets in this case, for hundreds or thousands of people. Which is the main benefit of that is that from a pure theoretical perspective, nobody can cheat the other person. Nobody, there is no single central authority or a single point of failure technically, where in theory, someone can impact and corrupt this kind of mechanism. So if the game theory, which means the design of the economic incentives, which is written in smart contracts, is well done, and second, if there is a critical mass on this platform, the output in terms of predictions that from a purely theoretical perspective this platform can provide could be considered not corrupted or not corruptible. Now, it's really interesting, but still today there is no wide usage. This is just an example that I give to you of one of the first experiments in this direction of decentralized economic relationship methods, which can enable a new kind of internet. But the topic is really complicated and long, so I invite you, if you're interested, to read a bit more. Same kind of approach could be followed for other verticals. In your opinion, could be Airbnb decentralized in 5, 10, 20 years from now? Do you see a particular benefit in eventually removing a central authority in a system that allows you to book an apartment or a villa from another person? Personally, I don't think that nobody today could provide to this question a really definitive and clear answer. Maybe in a few years, some kind of, even today, there could be maybe some teams that are working on the decentralized version of Airbnb, but I think that it will take some time, and ideally it could reduce for example, the fee paid to the system, or eventually it could create some maybe systems of reviews which could be, validated and managed automatically with an architecture, a solution, which is again written in the blockchain and not decided by a central team. For now, it's really, really early to discuss about these topics. Why? Because there are friction, first of all, in terms of costs and efficiency of the user experience of blockchain-based application. This friction is reflected by the current numbers with regard to the DApp world. These numbers can be found on the website dappradar.com. And if you read them when you want, try today or next week, you will see that even the largest DApp today has no real huge critical adoption. The largest one for today are in the gaming and betting industry, but many people, including probably me, think that there will be in certain verticals, in certain specific sectors, some models that can benefit a lot in real and concrete terms by decentralized architectures. It will take some time. The process might be, I mean, it could speed up for some months and then slow down a bit. But at the end, I think that this kind of new architecture can be really impactful in a few years from now. What we do with Jure is to apply in a progressive way this decentralized logic, providing to the extremities of our ecosystem more power and more weight. We decided to do that in a progressive way. We call this approach lean DApp model. Why? Because too many projects died in the last 2 years, and we realized that it's not really wise to spend 12, 40, 24 months for developing a product and then go to the market with an amazing blockchain-based architecture that costed you a lot of money without getting real feedback from the market. And we apply this model, for example, in the ODR. And what we are going to deliver is an online blockchain-based, technically it's an arbitration procedure covering at least 166 jurisdictions. So thanks for the time spent on, discussing this topic. And now I'm really glad to share the, first of all, to remove the screen sharing, of course, and to answer to some questions of yours on this or the previous topic, along with Luca, CTO and co-founder of Jure. And
here we go.
Here we go.
Thanks everyone for joining us, by the way, from my end. Yeah, Ale.
It's up to you, I think, to pick up the question that you would like to answer most, and or Fede as well.
Sure.
I think that there are a few ones really interesting, and I invite you also to do other questions now for us, for Raffaele, for Luigi, for Fede.
Okay, I'm seeing that there are quite few questions regarding, volatility of cryptocurrencies and so on and so forth. But I would like first to start with other ones, but I'll definitely address those because it's more of my field, my scope. I like this one from Max Andreas, which is dApps and decentralization seems like fit that could create a massive and bigger gig economy. And Max, yes, indeed, this is what we also do believe. That's why Jure is working heavily in the legal blockchain space amongst very few companies in the world. Like we are doing something that very few companies around the world globally are doing. So we do believe that this technology enables a lot of opportunities that were previously not there. For example, just imagine the potential of a YouTube platform which is completely decentralized, in which you are the owner of your channel. Whenever you want to move your followers and your videos and your comments and your likes to some other place, you are free to do so. And all the data and all the activity that you have generated, it's not on someone's server, so on Google servers in this case. This technology enables this kind of opportunities. So it opens up you to be in direct relationship with your clients, your users, etc. And as Alessandro was saying, it really enables peer-to-peer transaction, being it a financial transaction, but it can be any kind of transaction any valuable transaction that you can make with each other. This technology enables you to do it in a trustless way without having to rely on a central entity to ensure that you can do so. I hope that answers your question. Thanks for asking. Let me check. Let me go ahead. There is one that I think Luigi can take over later. It's really a wonderful question, I think, on the ODR and people that have lesser chances of accessing internet as a medium. So that's important, I think, to address. Okay, let me go with more technical ones, since I am the computer scientist for today. Okay, there was a very interesting question that I'm missing right now, but I recall it by heart, which is, are smart contracts always, triggered by user input? That's a wonderful question, because someone could ask, okay, I create a smart contract with my other party, but then what's the big the big thing with that, right? If I need to explicitly interact with it, and then I can trigger clauses within the smart legal contract, for example. Smart contracts need input, not user input. So it's not like the input can come really from anywhere. So you could imagine, for example, that me and you enter in a smart legal contract, which means like a legal agreement, which is empowered by a smart contract. And we could say, for example, let's say that I'm selling umbrellas, okay, and I sell them for, I don't know, $10 per piece. But I tell you that in the case in which rains are very heavy and there is like a disaster, in that case my price will be $15. And this condition, instead of being managed by me, by you, it's directly embedded in the smart contract. So the smart contract, for example, could receive data from other platforms that we both trust, okay? And when these platforms say, for example, the weather is going to be very, rainy, then the price automatically goes up. And it's fair for both of us because we agreed on that. The clause is automatically triggered, and there is no need for us discussing about that because we agreed on those terms. So that's an example of a smart contract that got the input. So it needs an input, but the input it's not coming from a human intervention as such. I hope that answers your question. It was amazing. I'm actually couldn't find who asked that, but thanks for asking this question. Yeah, I want to say,
yeah, maybe there is the question from Tanvir Munin. I hope the pronunciation is correct, because I think the question is, could you explain the self-execution of a smart contract with a practical example? If you agree, I will take this question. And
right.
Okay, I think this is quite important because this question is, let me make the classic, easier possible example. Let's say that there is in place a smart contract between me and Luca. I have an interest to conclude a deal with Luca in terms of a bet, again, with regard to the weather of tomorrow morning. In my opinion, it will rain, and in the opinion of Luca, it won't. So let's say that, for example, there will be a website with an interface to a set of smart contracts regarding bets that can be connected with another website. And the second website is a website providing information about the weather in my country. Eventually, the smart contract is connected with the API to the second website, providing information about what kind of weather will be tomorrow. And we eventually conclude the smart contract saying that we both put in the smart contract 1,000 USDT, so a certain amount of value in a stable coin. And the smart contract once will be triggered through the API to the second website, which is providing the information about which kind of weather there will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. in Dubai, according to the website X, Y, Z, the smart contract will enforce this kind of, bet according to the parameters we agreed. And for example, they can be that we do the bet, I lose, and then the amount of stable coins that I blocked, staked technically in the smart contract, they will be moved in favor of the wallet of Logan. So this is an example that exposes us, so thanks, Tammy, for the question, also an important point, because it's fashionable and cool to speak always about enforcement, automation, and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes, if there is no real value, of the same kind of technology we're talking about, so in this case, a value which is at least triggerable online, it could be a stable coin on a specific blockchain or another one. It might be eventually also simply a form of electronic money where the API, for example, Stripe, so a real a real fiat amount on Stripe triggered by a smart contract. It's quite complicated, but to keep it simple, the enforcement makes sense when there is something to be automated. In 90% of the cases, it is a certain amount of money that is moved according to some events that will happen in the real life.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we all enjoyed this very interesting question and answer session. So I think it's also, we are in the right moment to ask Kristi Erasmus to come on stage. She has partnered with us for creating this webinar, this third webinar by Jure on Legaltech. And I'm very happy that you are with us today. Hello, Kristi.
Hi, everyone.
Let me leave the stage to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi, everyone. It's very exciting to see the number of participants and that these discussions are going on. In South Africa, it's something that doesn't always get what it needs to do. Okay, I just want to quickly share my screen. Sorry. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've heard now what smart contracts are about, what the blockchain's about, and what alternative dispute resolution is about. So I'll primarily just be focusing on how essentially South Africa has approached this. Before I start, let me just give some background. Cape Town's Legal Hackers is part of the international group, essentially, where the idea is that you want to get your legal practitioners together with designers and technologists and coders together, basically, so that you can find an intersection for, you know, the social justice issues that are there, because your solutions aren't necessarily just going to come from a legal practitioner. It's also not necessarily just going to come from a coder or developer. So that's the idea with the Cape Town Legal Hackers. And then the Futures Law faculty is basically separate from that. But the aim there is also to essentially start educating people about the future of law and what sort of, you know, technologies and things are available. Okay, so let's start. So basically, the adoption of legal tech in South Africa has been very slow. And a lot of your traditional firms, when you start talking about legal tech and the future of law, they tend to roll their eyes and tell you, but it's pie in the sky, it'll never happen. And it would appear from research that has been done and from our experience that the primary reason for this is not only the fact that law itself is very much based on tradition, but also because that's what your legal professionals know. So they're very close-minded to bringing about any necessary change. And then probably the biggest thing that's sort of, you know, preventing a lot of the legal practitioners to change the way they practice law is because of the billable hour. Because obviously the longer you work on a matter, the more you can charge. So they tend to shy away from making use of technology that makes doing a mundane legal task faster, because it means they'll be able to charge less. So it doesn't appear that they're aware of the fact, but by using technology, you are going to be able to do a lot more, so you can have more clients, therefore you're still making more money. And specifically in terms of your candidate attorneys, which are the attorneys obviously that graduated and they're busy with their practical, but they can be used in a more efficient way as opposed to having to do the mundane legal tasks that can be performed by technology. So for example, the discovery process or contract review, that's just an example of some of it. But despite the fact that South Africa seemed to be quite slow in the adoption of legal tech, it would appear that there is a change coming about. And the primary reason for this change is due to the millennials, which were essentially born between 1982 and 2000. But they are essentially coming into the practice of law now. And your millennials are very much, they tech natives. They've never known a world without technology or without the internet or without data. So technology plays a very big part to them, especially when they're choosing employment. So research is done by SurveyMonkey as well as Microsoft that indicated that 93% of your millennials specifically looked at technology before choosing to be employed by someone. And 42% indicated that they would leave a company if there was substandard technology. So that's very exciting to see, and we've seen it as well with our events that we've had, and we've had students, that ask us about the Futures Law faculty. Those are primarily your students or your candidates that have not yet started legal practice. They're still busy with their practical training, or they're still studying. So it would appear that as they start coming into legal practice, there might be a change specifically within South Africa to the extent that legal tech is adopted or not. Okay, so I basically put together just an idea of some of the South African legal startups that there are. This is from the source Legaltech Africa. There's a lot of legal tech startups throughout Africa, but these ones are specifically focused on those in South Africa. So in terms of access to justice, you have a Citizen Justice Network, and they essentially have paralegals that essentially broadcast a story on the radio. So you'll have a paralegal that says, previously I had a client and this was the client's problem and this is how we resolved it. And that's then essentially broadcast on the radio, which is really useful to, people living in rural communities that don't always have access to internet, or, they don't have the ability to get to a legal professional to get advice. So that's one of them. And then you also have creative contracts, which is really great. It takes a contract, which it then essentially reduces into a comic form. It's legal, it's binding. But what's great about it is that it takes the complexity and the legalese involved in contracts away. So both parties immediately know exactly what their rights are, what their obligations are. And it's very useful in South Africa, given that South Africa has got such a high illiteracy rate. The fact that your contracts are essentially expressed in pictures, it makes sure that a lot more people actually understand what they've essentially bound themselves to. Okay, then in terms of business to business, these are essentially your, let's say, legal tech that they provide to legal practitioners or to other businesses to make it easier. You have Legal Legends, and they provide legal services to enterprises. They make quite a significant use of technology. And they also, instead of charging per hour, they essentially sell packages in terms of which you buy a set package, a set amount, which is great. Encode is a contract management software within South Africa, and Just Draft, together with Epoch Law, is contract management software, but that's focused on automatically automating legal documents or contracts between the parties. Baobab Connect is also really great. It's a case management application for lawyers, which essentially is available either on your desktop or on your mobile phone, but all communication between the legal practitioner and the client, whether it's WhatsApp messages, it's pictures that have been sent, emails, everything is together on one basically device or area. So it's much easier to access. Then Custos is involved with essentially preventing piracy, and Libro essentially provides updated information regarding your compliance and legal obligations within South Africa. In terms of your ecosystem, I've included Hilya, even though they're actually based in Netherlands. They play quite a big role in South Africa, where they essentially provide the environment to allow people that have solutions of legal tech to find funding and to promote that idea. So, for example, Creative Contracts as well as Baobab Connect were finalists in the Hill Innovation Competition, which they have every year. And then business to consumer, you have Lenoma, which is essentially, apart from providing automation of legal documents, it also provides online legal service, whether it's from essentially talking online with a lawyer to receiving a daily WhatsApp message about something that's happening in the law. Okay, then here's some more. I'm not going to go through all of them in too much detail, but Luminance essentially is really great because it allows legal practitioners to upload a legal document that they've been working on, and Luminance essentially, by way of the necessary algorithms and so forth, will scan the document and then highlight areas where there might be something that's missed, or where there's a weakness in an argument that's been made. I've discussed Baobab Law, MobiPrac. MobiPrac essentially is a mobile application for your attorneys and advocates. It essentially streamlines everything, all your documents and communications also on one place, and it essentially provides a track of what's being done on the file that you're working on, as well as recording all of your billable hours. So it makes that much easier. Legal interacts together with Legal Suite as well as Ghost Practice. They are essentially your practice management and legal software programs, which is used quite widely by a number of South African legal firms. Origin's Updraft is basically a means of automating contract drafting based on a questionnaire that's essentially completed. Some of your bigger law firms, which we call the Big Five, have started making use of the Origin's Updraft program, as well as some of the insurance companies. Then AfriWise is also, they provide instant answers to critical legal business questions via application, obviously, that's based on a membership fee that's paid. Rechtskliniek, the reason why that is included here specifically is it's one of the first or one of the only Afrikaans mobile apps which allows their users to ask labor questions. Afrikaans is one of the official languages, so that's obviously helpful for the Afrikaans population. And then Pocket Law is essentially, it's aimed at paralegals, but it's available to anyone, and it essentially provides information on, accessing the law, resources of the law, and any updates that need to take place. Okay, you have more. You have Epoch. They provide automation solutions for basically your small and medium enterprises. You have Nuva Law, which I'll also discuss in a bit more detail a bit later, but they provide a digital platform for the exchange of legal information, and then specifically they focus on a form of online disputes. Legal Chief is basically one of the very few legal apps in South Africa in terms of which their members, when they've got a legal problem, they go onto the app, they type it in, and immediately a qualified attorney is essentially assigned to that their legal problem and is essentially there to assist them. And then you have Law Practice Assist, which is essentially just a mobile application or toolbox available to lawyers, providing necessary links and web pages that will assist them in performing their functions. Okay, so that's basically just legal tech in general in South Africa. But now I specifically want to look at the topics that were covered in this particular webinar. So starting with blockchain, this particular map that I'm showing on the screen now was compiled by Baker McKenzie during February of last year, but it gives you a good indication of which countries in Africa are embracing blockchain and which are completely against it. Now, I'll see specifically Senegal, Sierra Leone, South Africa, and Tunisia are all embracing or proactive in terms of the blockchain. And the primary reason for that would be is they are also known as your countries which are ICT ready, meaning the information and communication technology is really great. But you can see also certain countries just are completely against blockchain or are not considering it. So basically, some of the blockchain efforts that South Africa has essentially taken on, probably the most well-known one, and which I'll also refer to a bit later, is Project COA, which was essentially the South African Reserve Bank together with the financial institutions and the major banks in South Africa. They essentially created their own Ethereum-based blockchain, private network between them, for the purposes of doing bank settlements. And by using that blockchain platform, they were able to execute a smart contract. But I'll get to that a bit later, but that was very successful. Then also you have the South African Central Securities Depository, which signed a letter of intent with the idea of making use of blockchain or a similar distributed ledger with Russia's National Settlement Depository, which was one of the first financial organizations to announce the development of a blockchain-based prototype for e-proxy. And then also very exciting is that the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa, together with a consultancy of 71.4 and CESO Global, are now essentially, working together to establish the first blockchain-based property register, which is really great because property transfer in South Africa is known to be fairly slow. And also it needs to take effect in the deeds registry. But by doing your blockchain-based property register, it's going to speed that up. And currently they are essentially studying it with about 1,000 properties that have been added. And those are primarily your government subsidized properties, which often aren't necessarily at the point yet where it's been registered in someone's name. So the people tend to sort of just like, say, well, you can have this property, and they think the ownership has been transferred. But that's obviously not the effect. But that's going to go a long way in assisting a lot of people that have disputes regarding who's the true owner of the house. Okay. Here is some of the blockchain-based institutions and companies within South Africa. There's quite a number of them. Something specifically to note, though, is that these are not legal firms. They're not involved in law specifically at any point. But it's good to see that South Africa is getting to a point where they've got like a blockchain academy and alliance, as well as a consortium. So that gives you a good idea. You're welcome to go look these up. They're all South African based. And then Lineum Labs, which is also a South African based company, every year they put together the South African blockchain ecosystem. And they encourage people that when you've got a company that involves blockchain to contact them so that they can add it. But this gives you quite a nice idea of the different industries or sections of the market that are making use of blockchain. You'll see that for financial services, it's very, very big. But you'll also note there's nothing really here in terms of justice or legal access or law in general. Okay, so that's something to take note of. Project COA, so this was the most successful blockchain/smart contract initiative undertaken in South Africa. And it was basically, the idea was to start considering what would be the possibility and chances of being able to successfully use a distributed ledger technology for interbank payments in South Africa. So basically what happened is that here in about beginning of 2006, the South African Reserve Bank started thinking about, how can we test to see if blockchain and then running a smart contract on that would be useful. So they started approaching the necessary financial institutions, and then here at about the latter part of 2017, basically they set up this Ethereum-based blockchain private network, and all of the banks that were involved had to build their own nodes and networks, essentially using physical and cloud-based virtual machines. But the idea was then to have this network operate just amongst themselves so that they could test this idea of making a wholesale payments and so forth. It's very important to know it was simulated. It wasn't actual transactions. It was just for the purposes of testing. These were some of the financial institutions that were involved, as well as an indication of sort of like what technology and software programs they used. This gives quite a nice picture of it, and this is available in the Project COA report, which South African Reserve Bank brought out. But essentially it was a huge success, indicating that your typical daily volume of South African payments could be processed by such a blockchain and smart contract system within less than 2 hours. because your transactions were being processed every 2 seconds, while at the same time your network of nodes, being obviously the banks that are operating from their individual computers and softwares, they were able to essentially provide the necessary consensus to allow for payments to proceed. At the same time, then it also allowed the South African Reserve Bank the opportunity to view all transactions within that blockchain, which goes a great way or very far in terms of their regulatory oversight. So basically the end result is South African Reserve Bank said South Africa is not fully yet at a point to make this commercially and realistically with actual payments available within South Africa, because there's still some things that they need to consider. But this, together with some of the other developments that have happened in South Africa in terms of blockchain, is very promising to show that blockchain and smart contracts is definitely something that's happening in South Africa. Okay, so just some ideas of the future of smart contracts. Like I've said, South African Reserve Bank are currently looking into some additional considerations before essentially making it available on a wholesale basis for your interbank payments and settlements. But very exciting was now, just at the end of last year, your Eastern and South African Trade Development Bank basically concluded its first live trade finance transaction with a smart contract for $22 million sugar deal, which is very exciting because, again, it shows that smart contract and blockchain, there's a possibility for it to actually operate in South Africa, which will generally just make the whole contracting process and payments and so forth a lot easier. Then just quickly in terms...
Sorry, Kristi, no, just because we are running out of time. And the thing is that I would love to invite all our team together on stage for the last 5 minutes, because also would be nice to talk together. And since you were about to talk about ADR, maybe also, I don't know, Luigi, what do you think? Would it be possible for you to at least answer this last question that was remaining from the last, from your session? Or maybe, I don't know, let's also get in conversation with Kristi about that, because, even also the speech that she just gave, maybe we could close the webinar today with that.
I'm available to both. And I think that, if you prefer me to answer the questions, there is time for giving short questions.
Yes, yes.
What do you prefer? It's up to you. You rule.
Yeah, let's close the question that we left before, because we were going to do that. So
okay, so the questions that I can read on my board here, right?
Luigi, there is one very interesting question which I think could involve both you and Kristi, because she could give the South African perspective, which was asked by Kara Mering, which is the following. Do you think ODR might result in more inequality between those with access to internet and those without? In South Africa, the most vulnerable portion of the population don't have easy access to the internet. Physically showing up at court aid and legal aid, it's sometimes their only option.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, this is my take on that. As far as there are problems such as lack of infrastructures, struggle for more primary needs such as food, water, other kind of primary needs, let's say, it's tough to imagine that e-commerce, for instance, could become a huge priority. And as a matter of fact, ODR related to this kind of B2C transactions could struggle to become popular, because it's just not a primary need. But I believe that it could be a bit different for B2B transactions. So at least as regard entrepreneur companies that operate in this continent, and especially let's say companies that are already engaged in the ICT sector, so that have a strong tech component. For this kind of players, it could be way more interesting to jump in ODR systems. Maybe it could be even more interesting for them having an external tool for resolving disputes, so something that is not strictly connected with the jurisdiction of that very country, which, you know, it's common belief that somehow domestic courts in this continent don't work properly, or there are some frictions, there are kind of fears by players, and so there is a tendency to an inclination to avoid this kind of means for resolving disputes. So I believe that for companies that already work there, so basically for B2B transaction and ICT companies, it could be valuable keep on operating in Africa while relying on ODR, basically.
South Africa is actually, although there is a lot of inequality in terms of people that have access to the internet and so forth, we're actually not doing that bad. I just quickly want to show you, I was going to show it now, but in terms of the World Economic Forum, you can see here, is this on the screen now? I hope it's on the screen, but anyway, basically, you can see there that in terms of South Africa, we essentially ranked quite well in comparison to 137 other countries in terms of technological readiness. And we've got about 76% of the population are internet users. And that is just set to essentially increase. So although maybe initially we might sit in a situation where it might be seen to, you know, limit access to justice to certain people, I think that's almost the better option that we're going to get, because lots of people have access to the internet, but they don't necessarily have the funds or the finances to go see a lawyer or an attorney. So I think as soon as South Africa starts getting onto a point where our data starts getting, you know, less expensive and fiber gets more available to everyone, I definitely think your legal tech and technology and ODR and all of that is actually going to improve access to justice.
Very much. Let me please add one last thing today for this webinar, which is that, well, I'm just about to send the link for a form that we would love our audience to fill. That's just 1 minute, and it's all about giving us a feedback on how this webinar went and what you think it could be improved. We really value your opinion, so please do it. And actually, I've seen a last question by Alexander Osondu. And I just want to say that Alexander Osondu is a very important part of our community on Telegram, which since he is a jur oracle. Okay, our jur oracles are moderators of our chat that voluntarily help us out with the daily conversation that happen in the group. So apart from inviting everyone to come in the group and contribute to the talks, actually, Kristi, I would like, if you like to answer to Alexander Osondu's question, which is the third last one, because it involves Africa and it involves also, I mean, everything that was about today. So if you are up to, it would be lovely, and then we will go and close the webinar. Otherwise, we can go anyhow. So please let us know.
Is this the question there regarding smart contracts are ill-suited to the existing legal mechanisms in Africa?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just trying to sort of understand the question.
I think, Kristi, that the question is...
I don't think this is...
I mean, it's more regarding the fact that, you know, according to common law frameworks, there are always some basic and essential elements of the contract. And I mean, probably Alexander wanted to ask a wide question, asking if we think that, you know, it's possible to include in a smart contract the essential elements of a contract. And I mean, in this case, he projected this question with South Africa, but for sure it's a more general question that of course applies also to that area. And generally speaking, I will try, Kristi, if you want to spend a few words, and then you can integrate and I mean expand. I think one core element about every time we ask ourselves these questions is to understand where the blockchain ends and where the normal, I would say, code starts. What do I mean? In terms of practical experience, it would be to imagine customers dealing with smart contracts in terms of pure code, unless they are professional coders. What do I mean? That it's really likely that, like today we use an application on our phone, we will interact with an user interface. So technically speaking, you are not operating and interacting directly with the smart contract with the code. You pass through the interface, and at that stage you can eventually introduce all the elements that are not that is not really smart to put on natural language code on blockchain. For example, the offer, the acceptance. So one idea that I always said, but I don't think it's, I mean, probably we will see next year what happens, and I asked that Kristi, what do you think if you have a platform where you have terms and conditions, so you have a normal procedure for signing the terms and conditions of a legal agreement, and then the smart contract execute the obligations of that agreement in such a way, how can we really say if the smart contract is legally binding? It's not only the smart contract that we should consider, but the whole procedure which involve eventually one or more component of pure smart contracts.
The thing is, yeah, there's obviously no certainty regarding the legal bindingness of the smart contract because there hasn't been any legal precedence of it. And in South Africa, I can see people are sort of afraid to actually engage in smart contracts, but the smart contracts do essentially meet all the necessary requirements. So whether you see it, as previously discussed, as basically a substitute for the contract, so therefore everything is in code, or whether you see it as a means to essentially automate your contracts, which is where I would see you would have a separate document with all the necessary terms and stuff, things like that. In either instance, if it meets the necessary requirements for a valid contract, offer acceptance and consideration, then it's a valid contract. In terms of general contract law, you should remember there's no, except for obviously certain transactions like purchase of property, there's no limitation or prescription on what form a contract needs to take. A contract can be verbal, it could be, in writing, and a lot of instances it's put in writing just as evidence between the parties. But there's nothing that says your contract can't be expressed in code. So that is sort of, seen. And the thing is just there's a lot of mixture between the terminology of what technology is and law. So that's why people tend to get confused as to whether all the necessary requirements for a contract have been concluded. You can debate it either way. Either a smart contract is just a means of performing an ordinary contract, or you could see it as itself being a contract. But in either instance, there are good arguments for both instances that it is legally binding.
So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. And to all the people that remained until the very end, I would like to tell them that we will be having other webinars coming also with other communities all around the world. So absolutely keep an eye on our Twitter and LinkedIn. And so I'm sure we will be seeing us again. And I hope you will be joining our channels, because this way we can keep on conversation and go on into this legal tech industry. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you.
Thank you so much for being today. And
Thanks for joining us.
We can just add something to the organization of this webinar with you, and for Cape Town, of course, we'll be more than glad to, if the feedback will be positive, to go and agree maybe some more vertical topic with including some explanation and walkthroughs on platforms. I think that the people who are listening now might be interested also in hands-on experiences, and we'll really enjoyed this opportunity. Thanks to you today. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good one.
Bye.